Hello everyone. A warm welcome to Day 4 of the AVPN Virtual Conference and this session on Scaling Excellence in Education. I am Roshni Prakash, Knowledge Director at AVPN. It's such a pleasure to have you all with us today. For those of you who do not yet know about AVPN, we are a network of funders and resource providers with over 600 members across 32 markets. Our mandate is to move more capital towards impact in Asia by providing social investors like yourselves opportunities to connect, learn, and lead. We have been sharing highlights of the conference live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, so please join us and share your experience by using the hashtag AVPN2020. I will be your MC. My role is to ensure that your experience in the next hour is a meaningful one. If you find that the voice or video is lagging at any time during the session, it may be due to internet bandwidth issues. It may help to pause the video by hovering your mouse over the display. Before we kick off the session, I'd like to highlight a few features of this room. To start, please make sure you are using the app version of Adobe Connect and not the browser version to have the best user experience. Please keep your microphones and video cameras turned off at all times. If at any point you get disconnected or you have a bad connection, try to log out of the app and log back in. If you're using the browser, refresh the page. Ensure that you're not running other programs in the background. Hopefully this will improve the situation. There is also a low bandwidth broadcast option available through Zoom. Please click on the link on the session page to access this. If you are facing other technical challenges, such as difficulties in hearing the speakers, please reach out through the Q&A pod or use the link provided to access the AVPN Tech Help Desk. We will address your query as soon as we can. We advise you not to use the community chat box to surface technical questions, as that will disrupt the session flow. We will have time for Q&A during the session, so do type any questions that you have in the Q&A pod. Your questions will only be visible to the panelists and the AVPN team. Rest assured that we are monitoring all the questions behind the scenes and will address as many as possible. There will be interactive activities during the session, and I would urge you to participate in these. If you look at the bottom of the screen, we will also provide you with links to relevant resources that you can download for further reading. These resources are also available on the session page on the conference website. Please note that this session will be recorded and you will be able to access the recording from conference.avpn.asia. On that note, I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Francis Hon, Director Asia Initiatives at the University of Chicago Yen Campus in Hong Kong. Francis will set the stage for today's session and introduce our esteemed speakers. Francis, it's over to you, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Francis Hon. Thank you, the AVPN team, for inviting me. It's my pleasure and honor to be moderating this session alongside with two very distinguished speakers, Andres Schleicher, Director for Education and Skills of OECD, and Dr. Satrio Tanijoyo, Global CEO of Tanoto Foundation. Before I pass on the floor to Andreas and Satrio, I know that that's a poll that we would like you to do to really let us know more about yourself. So in the screen, I think you'll be able to see the poll. We would like to ask you the kind of challenges that you're facing in scaling your current programs in education. Would that be lack of funding, resistance of local community, lack of evidence-based research, difficulty in connecting with trusted local partners to implement programs, difficulty in adjusting monitoring and evaluation to different contexts, or challenges that are different depending on local contexts? So please take a bit of your time in letting us know your thoughts. Right, the poll has closed, so I think we'll very soon see the results. So from what I've seen, I think the audience understands that actually those six are all challenges that are being faced. So the two items that are selected by most of us are A, lack of evidence-based research, and B, difficulty in adjusting monitoring and evaluation to different contexts. So I think our two speakers today will address those questions and also all the other items and all the other thoughts that you have expressed via the poll. So hopefully you'll be able to enjoy and be benefiting from our two speakers that will be speaking in the coming 1 hour. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Andreas Schleicher. So Andreas is Director for Education and Skills at the OECD. He initiated and oversees the Program for International Student Assessment, that is PISA, and other international instruments that have created a global platform for policymakers, researchers, and educators across nations and cultures to innovate and transform educational policies and practices. He is the recipient of numerous honors and awards, including the Theodor Heuss Prize, awarded in the name of the first president of the Federal Republic of Germany for exemplary democratic engagement. He holds an honorary professorship at the University of Heidelberg. So Andreas, over to you, please.
Thank you, Francis, and thank you for inviting me to speak to such a challenging theme, scaling excellence in education. Every education system has some excellent schools, but there are very few education systems that succeeded to build excellence at a systemic level, to help every young person become an excellent learner. And in the past, that was not so necessary. Our economies only needed a very few well-educated workers. Today, we need everybody to succeed, so this idea of scaling excellence is so important. And I must say, for us at the OECD, it's been a privilege to work with the Jedan Foundation on this. The Jedan Foundation is special in the sense that it doesn't promote specific beliefs or ideas, but it promotes the research for excellence, the research for ideas. As the poll also identified, building better evidence is so crucially important. If you think about how our education systems have evolved over the last 2 decades, at the OECD we are tracking educational outcomes through our PISA surveys, and when we looked at reading literacy, one of the most essential foundations in education, in the year 2000, the world was very simple. Reading in those times was about extracting text from books. We read books in those days. It was about linear information. When you didn't know the answer to a question, you could look it up in an encyclopedia, and you could generally trust the answer you find there to be true. Today, when you don't know the answer to a question, you look it up on Google or Baidu, and you find 100,000 answers to your question. And nobody tells you what is right and what is wrong and what is true and what is not true. Literacy is no longer about extracting prefabricated information. It's about constructing knowledge, a very different skill set. And a lot of those changes have been introduced by technology. See, in the year 2000, technology was very remote from most people. But then, 2006, that was a year when the smartphone was invented. 2009, when we did our fourth assessment, social media came into play, I remember. And then, in the last few years, think how artificial intelligence, big data, cloud computing, biogenetics have transformed the world. But when you actually look at education, we've seen remarkably little change in the quality of learning over the last 20 years. In the most advanced countries, the countries of the OECD, economically advanced, the world has been essentially flat. And the most troubling part is this. We have only about 1 in 10 young people who are capable to distinguish fact from opinion. 1 in 10, less than 1 in 10. Now you can say that is better than in the year 2000, when it was 7%, But again, we are living in a very, very different world today. Fortunately, there are always positive exceptions. When you can see, for example, China has been remarkably successful, the coastal areas of China, to raise the quality of learning outcomes. You can see also Singapore has moved up very considerably, building excellence throughout its education system. In Europe, you can look to Estonia, one of actually the poorer nations in Europe, moving to the frontier. You can see countries like Portugal in Europe or Poland, other nations that are not at the frontier yet economically, but that have consistently invested in building better education at scale. At the bottom of the scale, you can look at countries like Peru or Albania that are moving forward as well, despite very difficult circumstances, showing us actually it's not so much a matter of economic development. Everybody can improve. You can look to countries like Brazil or Turkey. They are not so much, improving the quality of outcomes yet, but they have been remarkably successful to add more people into the system to ensure that at least young people participate in education. And then finally, look at a country like Sweden that used to be sort of the star performer in education, and then it saw a depreciation, a decline of its educational outcomes for many years. But in 2010-11, it started to turn things around, and you can actually see they caught the ball, they moved forward again. And that brings us to where we are. But again, this is just a handful of exceptions to a pattern that has not seen systemic progress in education. We can see the same, when it comes to equity in education. Let's take a country, from the center, like the Slovak Republic in Europe. And you can actually see that the gap between the poorest and the wealthiest children in their learning outcomes is huge. It spans almost the entire world. A relatively small country, but if you come from a disadvantaged background, you see typically very poor outcomes. If you come from a wealthy family, you get excellence in education. Now, some people say that's inevitable, it's to do with parental background, family, and so on. But actually, when you look at another European country, Portugal, you can see that the 10% most disadvantaged students in Portugal do almost as well as the average student in the Slovak Republic. And when you look at the 10% most disadvantaged students in 4 Chinese coastal provinces that took part in the last PISA assessment, you can see the most disadvantaged students in Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, and so on. They do as well as the 10% wealthiest students in the Slovak Republic, showing us actually that poverty need not be destiny. We can actually scale excellence. We can attract the most talented teachers to the most challenging classroom if the context is right. This is about social background. We can do the same thing about geography. The yellow part of the bar shows us the performance variability of schools. You can see in a country like Finland, for example, there's only 5% of performance variation lying between schools. The closest school is always the best school. You don't need to worry as a parent, where do I send my child? Because you can rely on the systemic quality of the education system. At the other end of the spectrum, you find Israel, where actually most of the performance variation lies between schools. So the school you choose is hugely important for the success of the education of your child. But so even geographically, we can achieve excellence in education. Now, many people wonder how to do this. The first question is always, is money a guarantee? And you can say, well, money can get you somewhere. But money and time are not great predictors for success. On this chart, I show you the learning time that countries invest in education. You can see the blue bar showing you learning in school, and you can see the yellow bar showing you learning out of school. And you can see there are huge differences. The United Arab Emirates, students spend close to 60 hours learning. In Finland, it's a little bit more than half than this. Huge differences in the volume of learning time. But when you look at productivity, you can see that, in Finland or Germany or Switzerland or Sweden, students learn a lot in very little time. Whereas in the United Arab Emirates, they spend a lot of time and learn very little. So it tells you actually it's not about volume, it's about the quality of the experience. And you can see even, countries like the United States or Singapore. Singapore does very well on the PISA test, but it's largely because of effort, of volume, no? Large amount of time spent learning. When you look at the productivity of the education system, still a lot of room for improvement. This just underlines how important the search for better ideas is. And when we did our last assessment, we found something very interesting. I just said, money and time are not great predictor for excellence in education system. But the growth mindset that young people have, do they believe in effort, in hard work, as in meritocracy as a secret of success, as opposed, to destination of genes, of talent? And you can see there's a very strong relationship between the two. In number one in the OECD area on outcomes is Estonia. They're also number one in the growth mindset of students believing in their own ideas. When you look to Indonesia, struggling with outcomes, but more importantly, many young people in Indonesia believe that there's nothing I can do about this. I have the teacher who I have the genes of my parents, and actually I can add very little value. And those beliefs are very predictive for excellence in an education system. This was the starting point for a new research project with the Yedan Prize Foundation. Can we understand what is behind it? And we are just starting to scratch the surface. For example, growth mindset is a predictor for excellence, but we can also see where students have a stronger growth mindset, they are more motivated to master difficult tasks. They show a greater sense of self-efficacy. They're less afraid of failure. And again, not being afraid of failure is so important in the times in which we live. If you want young people to be imaginative, creative, you need to give those students space to explore ideas, to try out things. If they try out things, they need to take risks. If they take risks, they're likely to make mistakes. If they are afraid of mistakes, they're probably not going to be very imaginative. But we also see the growth mindset is predictive of students establishing more ambitious learning goals, and even of seeing greater value in school. So it's not just a nice to have. It seems to be very, very central in the 21st century. And let me also show that growth mindset helps some people, some groups more than others. It seems to be a better predictor for girls than for boys. It seems to be more important for students from disadvantaged than for those from privileged background. And it helps those with an immigrant background much more to succeed in the country in which they go to school. So you can really see those variables are very important. We need to understand them better if we want to build excellence in education. We also see that young people with a growth mindset are much more likely to see education as their future, to aspire to more advanced qualifications and degrees in their lives. And that is quite consistent across countries, and it's even visible once you take into account the social context from which students come and in which schools work. Let me add one last dimension. This is not about the quality of learning outcomes. It's about whether students are happy with their lives. Something that we value as well, and we can see there are huge differences across countries on this. Let me look to some of the star performers. If you look to Korea, if you look to Hong Kong, if you look to the 4 regions in China that we tested, those young people do very well on international tests. They have a very strong set of academic outcomes. But they seem unhappy with their lives. Some people look at this and say, well, we cannot achieve both. We have to make a choice. If students have to work hard, we need to put pressure on them, and they will do well in school, but they will not be happy with their lives. But again, international comparisons is not so simple. If you look to the Netherlands, if you look to Finland, if you look to Switzerland or Estonia, students in those countries also do very well on international tests. But they still feel happy with their lives. And a country like Singapore is sort of in the middle, showing again, we can reconcile the cognitive, the social, and emotional outcomes in education quite well. And again, school has a lot to do with this. We see that the disciplinary climate is very important, not just in terms of learning outcomes, but also life satisfaction. We see that the sense of belonging at school, identity, is school a place where I feel I belong, I make friends, is a very strong predictor. not just for outcomes, but also for students' happiness. The perceived support from my teacher. Does my teacher understand who I am? Does my teacher know my dreams and help me reach those dreams? The feedback I get from my teacher, the extent to which I collaborate with my students. And these are all things that we can manage in school. They are not, given from the outset. They are created by the school system. They are predictors for success. They are predictors for life satisfaction. That brings me to the most difficult question. What should we be focusing on in tomorrow's education systems? And I must say, this is an area where the frontier is moving very fast. In the Industrial Revolution taught us how to educate second-class robots, people who are very good to repeat what we tell them. Today, in the age of artificial intelligence, we need to think much harder about what makes us human. How do we complement, not substitute, the artificial intelligence we've created in our computers? And at the heart of this is student agency. Learning today is no longer just about learning something, but it's about building a reliable compass and the tools to navigate with confidence through a world that is increasingly complex, volatile, ambiguous. This idea of finding yourself, of building agency, co-agency, being able to think for yourself and work with others. Things that we attribute great importance to also in our PISA assessments are very important. When you think about knowledge, of course, disciplinary knowledge will always remain important. What you know of physics, of chemistry. But being able to think like a scientist is even more important these days. Can you distinguish questions that are scientifically investigable from questions that are not? Can you design an experiment? Or being able to think like an historian. In school, we often associate history with names and places and people, but the bigger question is, do we understand how the narrative of a society has emerged, how it developed, how it advanced, and sometimes how it unraveled when the context changed? Do we know what this means for the time in which we live today? If young people master the foundations of the disciplines, the ideas behind the disciplines, the principles, they can accumulate whatever knowledge they need in their lives. But often we have made our education systems a mile wide and an inch deep. We teach a lot of stuff at very shallow depths. We accumulate content knowledge that may expire very quickly rather than teaching fewer things at greater depths. And when we test learning outcomes in the PISA test, we try to really focus on those ideas, on epistemic understanding, on the capacity of students to think across the boundaries of subject matter disciplines. Can you look at problems from multiple angles? Innovation comes not, from extrapolating from a single idea, but connecting the dots where the next big idea comes from. And actually, knowledge is just the starting point. The modern world no longer rewards you just for what you know. Now, Google knows everything. The modern world rewards you for what you can do with what you know. That's the big differentiator. When you think about skills, it's about cognitive skills, but it's also about social and emotional skills. Character, curiosity, courage, leadership, empathy. And it's about values. Again, when you think about, what are the most transformative competencies in these days? Obviously, it's to do with your capacity to create value, to imagine, to build something of intrinsic positive worth. Probably what distinguishes us most from computers. But it's also about reconciling tensions and dilemmas. The world is no longer black and white. Often we need to be able to navigate ambiguity, manage complexity, and ultimately take responsibility. Mobilize our cognitive, social, and emotional resources. Those are outcomes that are so critically important. When you think about what this means for pedagogy, anticipation. In education, we are often very good to transmit the established wisdom of our times to the next generation. We're not good enough often to help young people question the established wisdom of our times. Also to be able to reflect, to step back, to see the bigger picture, to see the forest among the trees. And then again, mobilize action. If you put all of this together, the challenges are really, really huge. And that's why research and evidence is so important. In the past, it was enough to teach young people, some people very well, to focus on routine cognitive skills. Today, it's about managing complex ways of thinking and working. And it's about helping all students learn at high levels. And obviously, that requires a very different caliber of teachers. In the past, we could tell teachers exactly what to teach and how to teach. Today, we need a strong profession of knowledge workers, people who can design innovative educational practices, particularly in this current pandemic context. A lot of responsibility is on teachers to be creative designers, to be good coaches, to be good mentors, great facilitators, good evaluators. And of course, those kind of people don't like to work in a factory. We have often created our schools as factories with a very kind of Tayloristic industrial structure. But people who are professionals, they like to work in flat, collegial, entrepreneurial cultures. They like to speak with their peers, with their neighbors. Huge challenges to scale excellence in education. But what I've tried to show you is it is a challenge, but actually we see some countries actually moving forward quite rapidly on this. And Asia is particularly strong in this. We see some countries also moving beyond, the academic excellence to also put greater weight on the social emotional aspects that are going to be critical as well for tomorrow's work. There's a lot we can learn from each other and with each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andres. I think it's a great presentation, and it's very eye-opening. I think when we are moving from the PISA tests that I think all of us know very well about all the technical competencies to talking about growth mindset and other things that you have talked about. So I know behind all this, there's an important concept called student agency that talks about how students can be an agent of their own learning, and which can bring up all the wonderful things that Andreas had talked about. So there's a poll that I would like to invite you to participate. So of all the potential outcomes of students who are agents in the learning, which do you most look forward to? Would that be students become more motivated to learn? Would that be students become more creative in solving and learning life problems? Would that be students become more active contributors to society and community? Or that is students become more resilient in solving difficult situations? So when our participants are answering those questions, there's one question that I would like to ask Andreas. So about student agency, we all know that students and education is not just about the student himself or herself. It's not just about the school, but also about family, about community. So what can family, schools, or community do to encourage students to really become their own agents in learning?
Well, you see, I think in the world in which we live, education is not a place, but an activity. In school can provide the context for some of that learning, but communities can do so as well. Actually, if you look at some of the most successful educational experiences, they take place in the real world when students engage with communities, when families actually support them in finding, their own solutions. During this pandemic, many young people had to learn at home. They had to be motivated to learn. They had to show resilience, trying again when I failed. They had to solve complex, longer problems. They very much relied on the support of their families, their communities. So I think actually the future of education is more of a whole of society experience rather than just sitting in an institution. Students in the future will be less passive recipients and more active learners, because what you learn in school is just a starting point. The test of success is, do you have the capacity and the motivation to continue learning throughout your entire life? And that's why we need to make our communities, our workplaces, more places of learning than just doing what I'd learned when I was in school.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very good thought. And I think previously people tend to think in silos about schools being a learning place, and then community and family all think that they have different roles. But yeah, I think people rarely think about the kind of education or learning process as being a shared responsibilities or shared engagement between all the parties. And I think that brings us very well to what Satrio will talk about. So before we hand over to Satrio, I would like to thank Angus again, and we'll see Angus again when we have our Q&A session. So let me summarize our polls a bit. So out of the 5 options, I think more than half of our respondents say that they are most looking forward to students become more creative in solving learning and life problems when they become an agent of their own learning. I think it's a very interesting, and I think it's a very insightful response, because if we think about growth mindset, right? If we think about active learners, if we think about lifelong learners, then I think it depends very much on how students are internalizing what they are learning into the remaining parts of their life. So I've been involved in a project that thinks about 100-year life, that thinks about what we can do if we are living to until 100. And with a long life, with all the challenges and opportunities that we are raising, I think that is becoming even more important if our learning can make us being more creative in solving the life problems that we are facing in the next 70, 80, 90 years remaining in our life. So with that, thanks Andres again, and can I take this opportunity to welcome our second speaker, Dr. Satrio. So Dr. Satrio Tanu Joyo is the global CEO of the Tanoto Foundation. The Tanoto Foundation is a philanthropic organization that harnesses the transformative strength of education to realize people's full potential and to improve lives. He oversees the strategy development and implementation across the geographical areas where Tanoto Foundation operates, namely Indonesia, Singapore, and China. He is responsible for driving various initiatives to develop partnerships with the local authorities, universities, schools, healthcare clusters, and international organizations such as UNDP, UNICEF, and World Bank to enhance learning environments, develop future leaders, and facilitate medical research. So with that, can I pass over to Satrio?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Francis, Andreas, and all the AVPN conference participants. I'm very glad to join the fellow impact makers in this new normal virtual session. Scaling excellence in education. Andreas has a lot of results from the research. And in this session, I will share our experience in what we have learned accordingly from the grassroots. Tanoto Foundation, established by Mr. and Mrs. Tanoto, operates for almost 4 decades in 3 countries, Indonesia, Singapore, and China. Our strategic impact and philanthropy investment derives from the belief that quality education accelerates equal opportunity, which translates into programs touching the full life cycle of learning in the area of early childhood, basic education, leadership development, and medical research. In this session, please allow me to share the experience from the ground of how the philanthropy can augment its impact in education in Indonesia through evidence-based investment, impact-oriented approach, and collaborative partnership. First of all, let's understand the context in which we operate. Continuing what Andreas was sharing earlier on PISA, we can zoom in to see how Indonesia performed on this assessment. In the 2018 test, it is apparent that Indonesia students are behind their peers on the learning outcome achievement. More than 2/3 of them perform below the minimum level in reading and in mathematics. A study by the Asia Philanthropy Circle in 2017 suggested that anyone interested in improving Indonesia education can develop the 4 most impactful areas of intervention: the teacher quality, the school leadership, early childhood development, and vocational education. Based on this finding, Tanoto Foundation Indonesia made a strategic investment in the 3 out of 4 recommended areas: early childhood, teacher quality, and school leadership. For us, the decision to pilot and scale good practices is often made based on the available evidence and sufficient indication of potential success. Within the foundation, impact measurement becomes a crucial data source of such evidence. Each of our programs, Sigap, Pintar, and Teladan, have a clear impact goals and sub-goals, of which the regular monitoring allow us to know what works and what does not work. And we work closely with the local international partners, government, development agencies, and then academia, and also universities, who bring in different expertise and strength to ensure the successful implementation of programs. One particular strength of partnership that I want to highlight today, and why we should collaborate, is related to program scaling and outreach. I would like to demonstrate that using some real case study. Pintar. One of our flagship programs at a considerable reach is Pintar program. Pintar, meaning smart in Indonesia language, is a school improvement program focusing on increasing student learning outcome by working on the teacher quality and school leadership in public schools and madrasah in 5 less advantageous provinces in Indonesia. Just like what Andreas has mentioned earlier, Pintar hopes to shift learning with industrial system attributes to learning with world-class system attributes: critical thinking, higher order thinking skills, problem solving, and teachers with freedom to do innovation. We believe that in order to do transformation rapidly and at scale at the student level, meaning scaling excellence, we have to work through the agents of change in school. They are teachers and school leaders. In the location where Pintar operates, for every teacher we train, we can touch and improve the learning experience of 27 students. So we make efforts to transform teachers and school leaders to be able to facilitate students to achieve the world-class attributes. Research also has shown that teachers and school leaders, as impactful conduits of change, are very well researched. Studies show that there is a gap in the learning achievement of students with high-performing and low-performing teachers. Teachers' quality becomes very important when we notice that the learning gap widens over time, creating inequality between students receiving good and poor education. Similarly, outstanding school leaders make significant contribution to student achievement, as shown in the chart of the right side. Effective school principals exercise instructional leadership and management. They are not only administrative role. We also observe similar findings in Pintar program, which incorporates the best practices from its many predecessors. For example, the program called Pelita Pendidikan by Tanoto Foundation previously, which has shown to have improved student performance. For example, in reading comprehension, the students from Tanoto Foundation partner schools outperformed the national average and the champion school scores, AGRA scoring at 54.79%. We can also design the scaling mechanism at the strategic level. For example, Pintar partners with the central and district governments in the forms of co-financing and co-management of the program. This collaboration has reached almost 4 times more schools and more teachers than what the foundation can achieve on its own. In the early stage of implementation, foundation demonstrates the program effectiveness by directly delivering programs to partner schools and sole philanthropic financing. In the scaling up stage, the foundation facilitates the government to disseminate the program to more schools. In this example, for the dissemination, the philanthropic funding is at 17%, 17%, whereas the local government budget, including the special school funding, or called BOSS, contributes 70%. The key to scale costs effectively is to leverage on existing resources and infrastructure within the education system. Impact tracking, despite its self-explanatory importance for scaling efforts, can be a tool to strengthen partnership as it cultivates co-ownership and open communication among partners. One new feature of the program that we launched this year is the APS application. APS is the Android-based school performance monitoring application that we use to track the impact, in this case, the teacher performance and school leadership in partner schools over time. The dashboard provides a quick glance or snapshot of the progress, accessible to all partners. Most importantly, for all partners to review performance at a regular basis and take informed action promptly. The APS apps enables us to capture the aligned and shared goal in the form of measurable impact indicators. Another example from the angle of international cooperation and multiple philanthropic organization is Inspirasi program. It means inspiration in Indonesia language. It is a school principal leadership training program. It is a collaborative effort from many actors across borders. Inspirasi belongs to the Global School Leaders Network that has incubated similar programs in Kenya, Malaysia, and India. Through the connection by the Asia Philanthropy Circle, Tanoto Foundation, Jarum Foundation, and TAP Agri were able to introduce the best practice from the countries with similar contexts as Indonesia and adapt it locally. This is an alternative way to scale excellence in education. Networks like AVPN, APC, and GSL sister programs create multi-paths to accelerate the expansion of the innovative ideas, especially through the knowledge transfer. In Tanoto Foundation, we work mainly through partnership, and it is not without its ups and downs. Two common issues we face in partnership, either during scaling or pilot stage. One is partners having different, at times opposite styles and approaches to problem solving. Two is that the disparity in the partners' working competency that is large enough to disrupt the coalition performance. To address these gaps, last year, Tanoto Foundation with UNDP and together with Bappenas launched the SDG Academy Indonesia with the purpose to build the capacity of the actors in the public and private sectors to advance the sustainable development agendas, particularly in the area of evidence-based policy making, implementation, and innovation. Through SDG Academy Indonesia, we hope to nurture leaders that are lifelong learners. At the same time, we hope to improve the quantity and also the quality of public-public, private-private, public-private partnerships. With the SDG as a model, it will ensure the sustainability of adopted programs. By the way, sustainability is a key to scaling excellence. And finally, what are the takeaways? I'm ending my presentation to share my thoughts of the takeaway in scaling excellence in education. One, quality teachers and school leaders. Two, complementary partnership. Find combination of partners that strengthen collaboration, be it in program technical expertise or dissemination and amplification of impact. Three, the measured impact. Having a clear goal and the evaluation of its achievement or failure do not only serve as the basis for future investment, but also create shared accountability, ownership, and working language among partners. And fourth is use technology whenever possible. In SDG Academy Indonesia, we use mobile learning to reach more learners. In Pintar, we use apps or APS apps to track progress and communicate the results of the collaboration. The possibility of benefiting the use of technology is endless. Thank you.
Thank you, Satrio. And that's a very good summary of the many things that your foundation is doing. And by listening to what you said, I realized that the importance of partnership, right? That you select good partners, and as you said, being complementary, build complementary partnership to do different things in different parts of Asia. So what have you learned from all the partnerships that you have built? What do you think makes successful partnerships in education?
I mentioned, thank you, Francis, for the question. I mentioned in my presentation that complementary partnership is very important. Each member brings their expertise and knowledge, also the social capital, which will enhance the strength of the collaboration. It is also important to understand that within the complementary among the partners, it is important to have alignment of interest, vision, and mindset. We need to be clear on the why and stay focused on the shared passion and purpose. It is important to understand the organization's fundamental reasons for working with others and to believe that we are able to achieve more together than any of us would act alone. I think in AVPN conference, I heard many times people say that when you want to go fast, you go alone. When you want to go far, then you go together, right? So, and then also within that complementary partnership, we need to establish trust. And we need to establish trust together with the test of working dynamics. Because mutual respect makes resolving differences between partners, because we always have differences about details much easier. Partners can learn and work together through effective communication, shared resources, and agreed evaluation process, especially on how to both success and failure will be measured and reported. So embracing flexibility on the how as opportunities of learning and impact will be limited if we don't take a few steps outside the structured models that guide us how each partner works. So that's my take on that.
Thanks for that. So there are a lot of very good questions from the floor. So one of them is for Andrew. The question says, what would be your suggestion to enhance students' happiness or satisfaction in particular Asian countries like Hong Kong and Korea, which are under very different environment as compared to the Western countries in terms of culture, political situation, and education system? What do you think, Andrew?
Well, I think Korea and Hong Kong have done very well to strengthen academic excellence and also to ensure that students from all social backgrounds succeed. I think the achievements. You can see that student life satisfaction and also student growth mindset are often under development. And I do think it is important to create this space in the learning environments for those qualities to develop. Usually life satisfaction, as you could see, is related to the learning environment that I face. Is school a place where I feel I belong, where I make friends, where I find supporting teachers, a teacher who takes a deep interest in me as a person, not just in my cognitive. Students working on their own projects for sustained periods of time can often develop the kind of agency and interest that then, supports happiness and life satisfaction. So it's lowering the demand, flexible, more open learning environment, bigger, where students are not just consumers of learning content, but where they are active agents who set their own learning goals, who monitor their learning process, who actually are also very good to understand how other students learn. So it's really about, the context, the learning strategies that support students
Right.
in their well-being. And I must actually say, and I can say this, for many Asian countries, teacher relationships are very strong, but I do think there is more space for innovative pedagogy.
Right. There's a related question asked by another participant, saying that how could you measure growth mindsets, innovation, proactiveness in learning and all those kind of things, compared with the hard data that are being measured in the PISA test?
I think it's difficult, but I don't think it's impossible. We should, not just measure what is easy to measure, but we should measure what we treasure, what is really important. And actually, there have been great advantage of social and emotional aspects of learning outcomes. There have been great advances in character. For students' agency is something that we are beginning to in terms of quantitative indicators. I think what's important is that we strike the right balance between validity and efficiency in testing. And we strike the right balance between the relevance and the reliability. Often in exams, we are very much driven by reliability. We want to make sure that the exam is very accurate, but then we often lose the relevance. And I think it's very important to strike balance. And I think actually PISA today it has actually advanced very far in measuring skills. We measured not only solving skills but collaborative problems. Together with the Yedan Prize Foundation, we're now working on the growth mindset idea. To what extent can we quantify it? To what extent can we actually interpret those? So I'm actually fairly optimistic, and I do think it is very, very important that we build better ways to measure. Otherwise, we will narrow our perspective. We will narrow our teaching, and we will narrow the learning outcomes of students.
Yes, I agree totally with you. So, Satrio, there's another question for you. So, what do you think is the role of philanthropists in education, in particular in cases where infrastructure are being relatively underdeveloped? So what do you think, Satrio?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
I kind of.
What's the role of philanthropists in education, in particular in countries and regions where infrastructure is relatively underdeveloped?
I think to answer the question, I would like to put into perspective about Indonesia itself, because Indonesia is people can say that okay, we need some infrastructure. Yes, it's true, but at the same time, Indonesia enrollment for basic education is already at more than 98%. So that means that Indonesian students are enrolled in schools. So there are schools. Actually, in some areas where we work, in those provinces, there are too many schools. So the problem is probably sometimes we think, oh, everything is infrastructure. Everything is infrastructure. I think, again, we need to look at it from the evidence base. When you have 98% enrollment, but then the question is, if the PISA test shows that we don't progress as much as what we are expected to do, then there must be another problem. It is not the infrastructure problem, and that's what we need to find. So the role of the philanthropy is not to say whether it's infrastructure or it is development of the teachers, but it is to find the problem and address the problem accordingly. Should it be an infrastructure? We do also some infrastructure. I give one example. In the tertiary education, there is a problem in the vocational of pulp and paper. So we built together with the university an infrastructure to have a vocational study for the pulp and paper specialists. But let's not get bogged down in everything is based on infrastructure. Thank you.
Right. Thanks. So I'm aware of the time. So can I ask Andreas to Satrio to give us some closing thoughts and closing remarks? We would like to say something
Well,
to conclude. Yeah, Andreas.
I just want to highlight, actually, underline a point that Satrio make. Really, I think the future of education is about a whole of society enterprise, where actually learning takes place in many places, where people learn, where they learn, how they learn, and when they learn. And that's why I think philanthropy has a very, very important role to play. Philanthropy is representing civic society, and I think it can make education more of a civic space. And it does. We have seen, I think, the example from Satrio. It does play that role already very well in many contexts.
Yeah,
Satrio.
agreed. Okay, these are closing remarks, right? That's what you said. So,
Yep.
Overall, when I reflect on this theme of scaling excellence in education, that is about collective efforts. I think Andrea says it's a community, right? It's a collective efforts, complementary partnership to amplify the success of proven concepts to achieve the goal or the impact in education, which is student learning outcome. Nothing else. We want students to be smart as well as happy, and that's what we need to achieve. So it is actually a collective effort, complementary partnership, meaning, and then evidence-based. So please based on evidence, and then we have to keep measuring the impact. And I cannot not talk about COVID-19. Some people say COVID-19 is really the end of globalization. I would say that actually it is not. Share also about COVID-19 as my last remark is that what the world has witnessed during the pandemic is not so much an indictment of globalization, but a reaffirmation of interdependence among the nations and peoples of the world. And this is why COVID-19 teaches us that we cannot really take care of ourselves without taking care of others. And that's all about education that the final results should be. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I was told that we still have some more time, so I would like to write on the COVID-19 comment that Satrio has made and ask Satrio and then Andreas another question. So Satrio, you mentioned that COVID-19 is definitely not the end of globalization and regional collaboration. How can you convince other philanthropies, convince governments, convince policymakers that it still makes sense to foster that kind of international regional collaboration to make education more relevant locally and internationally?
You see, Francis, due to the less readiness of the education system to handle the closing of schools, the COVID-19 abnormal situation has promoted the agency of local champions, teachers, school leaders, etc., to innovate and contextual learning to tackle the learning crisis very, very fast. For example, teachers and school leaders took initiative to adopt e-learning and use of communication platforms to facilitate learning. They do it on their own initiative while waiting for the guidance from the central government or development agency. So in that area, learning has become more local in that sense. But on the other hand, we also observe the surge of knowledge transfer and idea sharing through volumes of webinars that are accessible worldwide. In this AVPN conference would be limited to participants attending in person in the past, but now it is available for view, at least for anyone, anywhere. So similarly, in education sector, online sharing has become the new normal, especially at the higher education, where the system and users are more technologically skilled. Although knowledge sharing is the low level of collaboration or loose collaboration, it is also an important step to build trust, which will encourage more collaboration and partnership in the future. And in our program, in Pintar, we work together with the Ministry of Education and also with the local government in the districts where we operate. We operate in 21 districts. And really, the result is excellent. We just completed a survey, and the community involvement, according to the survey, is 98%. And the children who we ask, are you happy with the learning at home? And 50% says very happy learning from home. Okay, and 40% says too many homework from the teachers, etc. So by doing this, actually we provide evidence base to the government, to the local government, and also to the national government, and then they can take the necessary actions. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, definitely. So, Andreas, what do you think? I think one of the things that always draw people's attention is, the kind of relationship or comparison, if you like, between performances or survey results of different countries. So, how do you think we can encourage people to still be learning and comparing and collaborating internationally after COVID-19?
Well, actually, like Satrio, I do believe that what the COVID crisis has done, it has shown us our interdependence and the opportunities that we have to learn from each other and with each other. And there's no field where we can do that better and in a more constructive way than in the field of education. Imagine, you look at the success of, countries in East Asia academically, and you look at the success of, countries in Northern Europe socially, emotionally. If we could combine the strings of different education systems, we could be in a very, very different space. And I think the future of learning really is about a much broader set of outcomes. I think the challenges that we face are common ones. And I don't think that's just about the international dimension. I think the same is true at the local and regional levels. We spend a lot of time in education to push ideas into schools and classrooms. Sometimes good ideas, sometimes not so good ideas. We spent actually very little time to find the good ideas in the classroom and to scale them and to spread them and to ensure that every teacher, every student benefits from what we know about most effective practices. Building better evidence in education and sharing that evidence across classrooms, across schools, across regions, across countries, I think is our best way to actually build a more coherent understanding. And the last dimension I want to add to this is what the COVID context also highlights is the importance of global competence. Like, to what extent can we appreciate different ways of thinking, different ways of walking, different cultures? We are exposed to them, whether we want it or not. The world is interconnected. The crisis that affects, one part of the world, and this is not just a health crisis, it's also about the financial crisis, the economic crisis, will, infect other countries, other nations. We are in this together in understanding different ways of thinking, different cultures, I think is becoming crucially important. Globalization is no longer about traveling to different places. Globalization arrives at everybody's doorsteps. When you switch on your television, when internet, when you actually go into the supermarket, you are exposed to different cultures, different ideas, and where young people are not capable and not willing to engage with that kind of diverse thinking, they are going to have a hard time in the world in which we live.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Yeah, I think that draws a very satisfactory and thoughtful conclusion to our episode. So, all the participants, please join me in thanking Satrio and Andreas again. So, can I pass the floor over back to the AVPN team?
Thank you again to our moderator, Francis, and panelists Andreas and Satrio for this engaging and inspiring discussion on a topic close to many of our hearts, how to improve education outcomes around the world. We have now come to the end of the session on scaling excellence in education. I'm sure you'll be excited to know that we had over 430 participants in the room today. This session was made possible with the kind support of our lead partners, Edan Prize Foundation, Chandler Foundation, and the Stockholm Environment Institute. The session was recorded, and the recording will be posted on the conference website soon. Please look out for it. To continue chatting with your speakers and fellow delegates, please make full use of the AVPN connector. You will be able to see who logged on to the session on the agenda page and connect with them easily from there. Do share highlights of this session on social media, and remember to tag us using the hashtag AVPN2020. We also invite you to visit the AVPN Hub on the conference site at conference.avpn.asia/avpn AVPN-Hub. This showcases various AVPN platforms for collaboration and networking. Up next is a session on the challenges for foundations in the coming decade. This will be starting at 6 p.m. Singapore time. That's GMT +8. But before you leave the room today, please do share your feedback on this session with us by answering the questions that you see on your screen now. Thank you very much, and please enjoy the rest of your conference.